Apparently, I may have high cortisol. I know. But I get stressed, I'm tired sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, got a little extra around my belly. I sometimes, or maybe more than sometimes, crave sugar. And according to the internet, that means that I may have high cortisol. The problem is, I'm also 55. So before I go adding to the ever-growing list of things that I need to worry about in midlife, I thought I would look into what the medical evidence actually says. So are these actually signs that I have high cortisol? Or that my cortisol is too high? Or are we just assigning a new name to common symptoms? Once I started looking, cortisol was everywhere. There's cortisol base, cortisol belly, foods to lower cortisol, supplements to lower cortisol, and lots of lists out there to tell you how to recognize high cortisol. And here's where I stopped because, okay, I can check off many of these boxes, but a lot of people my age can check off a lot of those boxes. It's pretty easy to spiral when you just have a non-specific list of symptoms. You can find yourself in any one of those at any given time. So that's a claim I wanted to investigate. Are these symptoms actually telling us that our cortisol is too high? To answer that, I had to find out what cortisol actually does. And the first thing I learned is that cortisol is not some toxin that we're supposed to eliminate. It's an essential hormone made by our adrenal glands. Try saying that 3 times fast. An essential hormone made by our adrenal glands, and it does a whole lot more than respond to stress. It helps regulate things like blood sugar, blood pressure, inflammation, our metabolism, and our sleep-wake cycle. In other words, we need cortisol. This was one of the most interesting things that I learned. Cortisol is supposed to rise in the morning when we first wake up. There's even a name for it. It's called the cortisol awakening response. One thing Andrew Huberman talks about is that cortisol follows a daily rhythm, and that an increase in cortisol earlier in the day is actually part of normal physiology.
Right? What I mean is you want high levels of cortisol, yes, high, upon waking and in the first hours after waking. You do that with viewing bright light, ideally sunlight, hydration, exercise will help. There are a bunch of other things that you can do that I talk about in the new episode of the Huberman Lab podcast.
So a cortisol increase isn't actually evidence that something's wrong. The timing and context matter. We want it doing the right things at the right time. Which brings me back to all those lists of symptoms. This is where the whole thing got especially interesting to me as a 55-year-old woman, because I started noticing that a lot of things being called or blamed on cortisol online were actually things that sounded very familiar to a woman in midlife. Cortisol belly, we also hear menopause belly. Trouble sleeping or waking in the middle of the night often gets connected to cortisol, but sleep disruption and night waking are also things commonly talked about during perimenopause and menopause. Brain fog also gets connected to both anxiety and irritability, cortisol, mood change, menopause, fatigue. That gets put on both lists too. Don't even get me started on cravings. Same symptom, different label, still not a diagnosis. So instead of trying to decide if my symptoms belong in one column or the other column, I wanted to know something more useful. What actually makes a doctor suspect that someone's cortisol is too high? Abnormally high cortisol absolutely can be a medical diagnosis. Cushing syndrome, for example, involves prolonged exposure to high cortisol. But doctors aren't diagnosing that because someone is tired or stressed or has too much weight around their belly. That's very different than deciding that my cortisol is too high because I'm stressed and my pants don't fit. They're more likely to look at it when you have easy bruising, muscle weakness, wide purple stretch marks, along with characteristic fat distribution and metabolic changes. And then there's cortisol base and cortisol belly. And here's where social media takes a little bit of physiology and makes it a much bigger issue. Genuine cortisol excess can affect fat distribution. That does not mean that a fat face or a round belly proves high cortisol. Looking in the mirror is not a cortisol test. A lot of this is being used for clickbait. You might have seen, you're not ugly, you just have too much cortisol. Well, last week you said the puffiness was inflammation or too much sugar or blocked lymph nodes and we need to do some drainage. you know? Good Morning America addressed this a couple years ago.
Because many beauty enthusiasts and content creators are pointing to cortisol as a reason why our faces might be puffy one day and not puffy the next, naming it cortisol face. First, cortisol is a naturally occurring hormone, and it helps us with a lot of different functions: our blood pressure, our blood sugar, when we wake up, when we go to sleep, and even how we manage nutrients like fats, carbs, and proteins. And it also helps us in times of stress.
They also explain that while excess cortisol can lead to extra fat in the face, other things like diet, kidney function, thyroid issues, even medication, and how we sleep can do the same. So my next thought was, fine, why not just test my cortisol? So it turns out that's not as straightforward as I assumed either. Cortisol changes throughout the day, and when a doctor is testing for Cushing syndrome, they like to do multiple tests. It's not just one test based on one level. So ordering myself one random test because TikTok scared me is not going to answer the question the way I thought it would. Which leads us to an interesting problem, because some of the advice online is actually really good advice. Sleep, exercise, go outside, manage stress, take time to relax, do things you enjoy. I'm not arguing with any of that. You don't have to prove that your cortisol is broken to get more sleep and take a walk. Where I get uncomfortable is when we go from chronic stress isn't good for us to you have these 5 symptoms and therefore your cortisol is too high. And then somehow, magically, there's something for sale. And shocking as it is, you don't have to spend money because the internet told you to.
Now, unfortunately, there's no easy way to manage or correct cortisol, and I'd caution you to save your money if someone's trying to sell you a product that quickly fixes.
So, after all this research, where does that leave me? Do I have high cortisol? I don't know. Being 55 and sometimes tired and waking up in the middle of the night and carrying some extra weight around my middle, especially in midlife, isn't enough for me to diagnose myself with high cortisol. If I've developed concerning or progressive symptoms, then that's a conversation I need to have with my doctor. In the meantime, could I sleep better? Yep. Exercise more? Definitely. Manage stress better? Probably. I'm working on all those things, but maybe we don't need another thing to panic about at 55. Cortisol isn't the enemy. Chronic stress is bad for us, yes. But so is convincing ourselves that normal midlife symptoms means something else is wrong. My take: keep the healthy habits, lose the cortisol panic, and if you're really concerned, see a doctor. Okay, I have spent the last several minutes trying to pretend this is a professional operation here. My mic stand, I'll put a picture up. My mic stand is a Kleenex box, and my camera stand includes some books and a jar of peanuts. So, there you go. There's your hot tip, how to start a YouTube channel. Bye, thanks for watching.